Hello my fellow adventurers. In today's video, I want to tell you about some of the worst mistakes I made as a rookie traveler. Now, I've been traveling full-time for the last 3 years, but my journey with travel, pun not intended, started a long way back when I was a teenager, when I started traveling to see my father, who at that time lived in Asia. We traveled the continent together, but it was only when I was an adult that I actually started to travel solo. Needless to say, that is a long time to make a lot of mistakes. Over time, of course, I learned my lessons, and I would love to share those lessons with you so that we can all become better travelers, tourists, guests, whatever you want to call yourself. All right, shall we get going? Let's do it. Mistake number 1. Keeping all of your cash and all of your documents in a single wallet. Now, the reason why that's a bad idea, and I would say a mistake, is because if you end up losing your wallet or, God forbid, end up getting mugged, you could lose absolutely everything and be in real big trouble. That's why I always advise to distribute, spread out your cash, your documents, your cards all across your luggage. Keep some of it close to you on your body. It could be like a fanny pack or some sort of small wallet that you always keep close to you in your pockets or on your body. The rest you could spread out across your luggage and your backpack. Make sure you find neat and concealed pockets to put the most important bits of cash and documents in your bag. I, for example, usually put some cash away in my toiletry bag because usually, if someone wanted to steal something from my room, they probably wouldn't look where my toothpaste is. Mistake number 2. Over-focusing on how much things are and picking the cheapest option. Now, the reason why that's a mistake is because usually the cheapest option is not necessarily the most sustainable option. Tourism contributes a lot to the global economy. It's about 10%, but not every travel practice is sustainable or responsible. And not every tourist contributes positively to their destination and the place and the community that they visit. Over time, I have learned to seek out tour guides, agencies, souvenir shops, hotels, you name it. Organizations that contribute positively to the local environment and the local community. Even if it costs a little bit more, at least I know that my visit in that place ends up creating a positive effect, a positive contribution, and doesn't actually damage the environment that I'm visiting. And isn't that part of our basic responsibility as travelers? If you can afford the luxury of travel, that probably means that you can also afford to spend a couple extra bucks on the more sustainable option. Leave a positive contribution behind you. Mistake number 3. Thinking that I had to visit all the top sites in my destination. Now, this is a pretty common one because, of course, if you go to Paris, you probably want to see the Eiffel Tower. If you go to Rome, you probably want to see the Colosseum. But as a full-time traveler, I used to think that I absolutely had to tick off all the top sites in every single city that I visited, otherwise it wouldn't count as having visited that city. That's a big mistake. Top sites are usually important historic sites, but they're not necessarily to everybody's taste. They're not necessarily the most important, coolest, most interesting places that you can see in any given destination. Over the last few years of traveling full-time, I have come to the conclusion that when I visit places, I don't just want to see historic ruins. Actually, I'm much more interested in getting to know local people, in going to a modern art exhibition or exploring a neighborhood that's not in the tourist guides. Those are the things that often make me feel like much more of a local. See, I truly believe that there aren't really touristy cities in the world. There's just places that are filled with tourists, but every city has corners that are completely local, that feel really authentic, and that I'm sure would surprise you. So no pressure. Don't go to all the places that the tourist books tell you. Go to the places that you feel passionate about. It always makes for a much more rewarding travel experience, trust me. Mistake number 4. hanging out with other travelers rather than locals. Look, it's so easy to fall into this trap. You go to some foreign place, you stay in a hostel, you end up hanging out in a hostel cafe or restaurant with people from all around the world, you end up sharing stories together and then making plans together to travel the rest of the country together. But we end up being in is nice company, but also a bit of a bubble. And it's likely to be a bubble that reminds you of you and where you're from. But is that really why you went traveling in the first place? I've fallen into this trap a lot of times and ended up making some great friends from all around the world, but maybe not really getting what I came to a specific place for, i.e. a local's perspective. It was only when I realized this after a couple of years of travel that I started really actively reaching out to locals via couch surfing, via Instagram, all kinds of social media platforms, and trying to find locals who have passions similar to mine, but who could take me around their city, show me their local food, and tell me a little bit about the place that they live in and about themselves. So much of travel is about getting a different perspective and expanding your horizons, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you leave your comfort zone behind. And yes, sometimes that involves leaving behind your hostel friends and heading out into new friendships with people who come from the destination you came to visit. That's the best part. Mistake number 5. Letting my inability to speak the local language prevent me from seeking out local experiences. Look, I speak English, you probably speak English because you're watching this video, right? But not everybody in the world speaks English, and we can't expect that of everybody. So often I have found myself in faraway places where nobody spoke English and I didn't speak the local language apart from a few words. And I ended up feeling quite uncomfortable, and on a couple of occasions I even ended up saying no to certain experiences or visiting someone's house because I felt like I would be interfering and like I would be, you know, just some annoying foreigner sitting in the corner and not understanding a word and not being able to communicate. No, it's not like that. If someone invites you to their home, if someone wants you to see their house and meet their family, or if someone simply offers to take you on an experience or an adventure, even if you don't share a language, take it. Accept it. You know, there's so much to be said for communicating beyond words with your body language. So much of how we communicate, even now, the way that I'm speaking to you with all these gestures, so much of how we communicate is about our body, our expression, our smile, our tone. It's not just about expressing complex ideas with very complex words. A lot of how we talk to each other and how we relate to each other is beyond the languages that we know. It's universal. Of course, learning a few words in your host's language goes a long, long way. Simple things like thank you, please, hello, and good night. Those are the basics. There's a lot more to human interaction than simple words. So make sure that you don't let language be a barrier between you and the rest of the world. Mistake number 6. Taking photos of people without their permission. There's been a little bit more conversation on social media about this one in the last couple of years. Taking photos of people on the street in foreign places. Do we ask them for permission or do we not? Well, it's a very delicate subject. And of course, it's up to everybody to decide for themselves and figure out just which camp they belong to. But I used to just take photos of pretty much everybody that I could spot that looked interesting in some way, and I wouldn't always bother about seeking out their permission and asking if they were comfortable with me taking the photo. Now, this is, of course, before my travel vlogging days. As a travel vlogger who publishes her content in public on social media, content that could potentially reach a lot of people, and of course it's content that I make a living from, I've become a lot more careful with things like people's permissions. These days, I don't think I would take, at least I would never publish a photo or a video of anybody without them knowing that I am taking that photo or video, and without them knowing that I'll be probably publishing it on my social media channels. I think a good way to think about it is How would you feel if someone took a photo or a video of you without your knowledge and then ended up posting it on social media? I think if you're looking for a good way to decide, then that is always a nice question to ask yourself, because it forces you to think about it a little bit more empathetically. Mistake number 7. Only taking photos of the cliches or the subjects that I expected to find in a given place. Look, we all know these photos. The photos of the yogis in India, the photos of the geishas in Japan, the cliches, the tropes that we recognize certain places for. And we recognize those cliches for a good reason, because those people, those kinds of characters, I should say perhaps, are in some ways representative of the culture of that region. But what sometimes happens with travelers is that as we travel to these remote places, we kind of over-focus on those tropes and those characters that we recognize, because they are things that we almost expected to see there. They are the characters that we find the most interesting, or, God forbid, I hate that word, exotic. And is that really a good way to represent a country when you come back home? I always like to think of every single culture and every single community as a tapestry of characters. Yes, of course, you've got the most recognizable ones on one end of the spectrum, but on the other end of the spectrum are the completely ordinary individuals, normal people like you and me, who are also part of that country's cultural fabric and tapestry. All right, we're done. Those were the seven mistakes I used to make as a rookie traveler, things that I don't do anymore. These are lessons that were hard learned over many years of travel. I always say that the world belongs to the brave, and honestly, it does. If you're learning, if you're growing, if you're constantly trying to improve your game, your travels, whatever, that puts you in the category of those of us who are brave and who live our lives with courage and openness. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah!